All right. We will now talk more about Descartes. Like I said, I'm using some of the Nadler and Nadler here, but it's all pointing towards either what's in the meditations or background that'll help you understand the meditations. So, Descartes in this context, where Bruno has been burnt at the stake, where Galileo is threatened with house arrest, right? Where Copernicus had his books banned. He knows his ideas are equally as controversial. He also says that the Earth is not the center of the galaxy or universe. So he wasn't punished, but this scary context made him wait to publish his book. Remember, though, what I just said in the in prior recordings is that ideas are connected. The only way you can prove an idea to be true is by connecting it to other true ideas. So Descartes is clever. I mean, he's really clever. He says, if I publish my book that says the sun is the center of our galaxy, I'll be busted. But I know that other ideas of mine connect to that idea of the sun being the center and support it. And I know that the sun being the center connects to and supports other of my ideas. And he said, okay, I'll be slick here. I'll be clever. I won't publish the central idea, sun is center of the universe, that will get me in trouble. I will just publish and keep researching on sort of adjacent, diagonal, or connected but indirectly connected ideas. So he's basically still doing research around the edges of the idea that will get him into trouble without going so far as to step directly into trouble. You see what I mean? You know, it's like if you try to prosecute the mob boss, they'll kill you, they'll assassinate you. But if you prosecute some of their associates, right, you can still sort of attack them indirectly, and it implies that the mob boss is guilty if everyone who works for him is guilty. You know what I mean? So Descartes' pretty clever that way. He's doing research on his controversial ideas, but only publishing the things that seem less controversial, even though they support the controversial idea. Okay. So some of the work that Descartes does is still used today. Remember, philosophers and scientists were siblings or two sides of the same coin, or doing similar work in slightly different directions at the time. They hadn't really split off yet. So Descartes is a mathematician. He invents what's called Cartesian coordinate system. So Cartesian just means of Descartes. He improved what's called analytic geometry, and his work on math helps eventually calculus to be discovered, and Newton and Leibniz, other scientists who are also philosophers, they're the ones who discover calculus. Okay? So, a few things. Descartes' science supports his philosophy supports his science or math, and his math or science is still used today. It's still accurate today. So I'm trying to bring what philosophy and science do closer together here than most people think. I'm also trying to imply, where do these brand new ideas of calculus and new geometry come from? New ideas come from people willing to think outside the box. New ideas come from people who take nothing for granted, who challenge every assumption. Those people are philosophers. Those are the ones who love wisdom and want to make sure that every idea they have is actually wisdom and true, and not just some floating around false idea they picked up from, you know, the National Enquirer or some tabloid or something. Okay. So, Descartes himself is French. It's actually a very French name, right? René Descartes. It's very French. But if you'll notice in the Nadler and Nadler we read, he's living in The Hague and Leiden. These are places in Holland. He's in Amsterdam at the very beginning, right? These are Dutch places in Holland. I know it's sort of confusing. Is it the Netherlands? Is it Holland? Is it Dutch? It's all these things. So you might ask, why is a Frenchman living there? It's because the Dutch were much more tolerant at that time than the French were. so he could say more things with less trouble in a more tolerant society. So this is part of the precondition for science, or the precondition for truth, is either a little or a lot of tolerance of weird ideas. That's how we discover the truth in science and in philosophy and in knowledge generally. We need tolerance and academic freedom to pursue crazy ideas and see how they pan out. Also, at this time, Holland was crazy rich. If you've ever heard of the what's it called? The tulip crisis, something like that. There was a crazy high investment in tulips, and it led to this giant boom bust cycle in investing in tulips in Holland. Part of the reason that happened is because Holland had so much money that people were investing it in silly ways. Well, why did Holland have so much money around this general time? The same tolerance that leads to an explosion in scientific and philosophical knowledge also leads to an explosion of economic growth. The Dutch were tolerant of people buying and selling all sorts of things. They were tolerant of people saying and thinking all sorts of things. And it made them rich, and it made them scientifically advanced. They let in immigrants from all over the world, so long as they had something to sell or some new idea to talk about. And I would like to think that part of the power and sort of glory of the United States is similar. High levels of tolerance in our history, and high levels of letting lots of people with new crazy ideas and new crazy stuff to sell in and out of our country all the time. That's a big idea. We're jumping from 17th century Holland to present day America in our history, but I just want to float that as a possible idea. Tolerance tends to lead to high economic output and high knowledge output. The Dutch had it, the United States has it. Seems to be the same reason. Okay. So, something else I want to point out. You might be saying, Professor, God, like every other professor, you make us read so much stuff that's not important. Why did you make us read about this guy Bacon, this guy Copernicus, all these other dead folks, just so we could read about another dead folk, Descartes? Well, remember on page 22, Descartes says, I'm a great admirer of what this scientist Francis Bacon did. Now I'm going to do my own version. I'm going to improve on what Bacon did by learning from him and then doing it my own way. First of all, bacon, delicious bacon. But there's a scientist named Francis Bacon. What I want to point out here is that Descartes did something very new. It was almost a revolution in philosophy. It was that brand new. And yet he could only do something innovative, outside the box, brand new, by being in dialogue with people like Francis Bacon, dialogue with people like Hobbes. So the suggestion to you is that if you want to be radical or innovative and do something new that everyone else is going to be interested in, it doesn't require being in isolation, ignoring others, or denying what others think. You can learn from others and then evolve what they said, pivot from what they say to develop it in your own way. Real knowledge, including innovation and revolutionary knowledge, comes from dialogue with other people. This is why, believe it or not, professors like myself learn from their students and learn when they teach their students. Because I'm not going to have something revolutionary to say about Descartes simply by retreating from the world and reading it all by myself. I'm going to get it by talking with people, including my students. So, if you want to have a revolutionary idea, be like Descartes. Read widely. Excuse me. Talk with a bunch of people. Expose yourself to new and radical, new ideas that you don't agree with. Learn from those to help develop your own self and own ideas. That's how our class works. It's how Steve Jobs was innovative, is he was looking at what other people were doing and thinking about how he could do something not just true or good, but new in relationship to them. It's how our class works. It's how Descartes did it. And it's even how this book by Nadler was written. Look at the very last page of our PDF. It's acknowledgments. They say, this book would not exist. We could not have done it without. And then they name 1 billion people who helped them. It's also how the Meditations was written. I didn't include it in our PDF because it's not assigned reading. But at the end of the Meditations were published objections from other people and then Descartes' reply. An ongoing, living conversation. I think that's really cool. And I really want you to understand that you are part of that ongoing conversation. Whether you like it or not, I've dragged you into this ongoing conversation. Talking to you, reading your papers, hearing you in discussion, helped me develop my ideas about Descartes, about other things, and then I turn them into journal articles, books, future classes, etc. It's all a network. Nobody comes up with these innovations on their own. So thank you for being part of my network. Okay. In the 17th century, science is finally starting to make strides. We have people like Galileo, Copernicus, and Newton. Really the parent of modern science is Newton. And it's finally starting to make strides. I don't want to sound dismissive, but what science, in quote marks, looked like before this time was basically alchemy and witchcraft and snake oil salesmen, right? Now, finally, around Descartes' time, science is starting to get some traction and say true stuff that it can prove instead of jabberwocky nonsense. Bacon's a good example of that. Look what Descartes does, though. He says, ooh, Bacon's doing real science. He's proving things. Awesome. Then Descartes takes a step back, though, and he goes, but what if everything Bacon is saying is based on a false assumption? And this is exactly how the Meditations is going to start. It says, how do I know that my foundations and my starting assumptions are true if math is, for instance, the sort of language that science is written in, and that's the truth of the world? How do I know that math is even accurate? So you might want to say, well, science is finally starting to get traction. And then Descartes wants to do this dumb philosophy and say, well, but science is true, but how do we know the true is true, man? It can seem sort of useless, right? But this is what I want to say, is that Descartes will tell us in the Meditations, if you build something with faulty knowledge, you could build a nuclear reactor that has a weak spot in it. If you start speculating without any feet firmly on the earth, you could just make up imaginations like fiction. Might be interesting, but it won't be true. Or if you start with a foundation of what other people have told you is true, you could have something that's just built on lie after lie. All this catfishing, deep fake stuff that goes on the internet. People will cite 82 sources, but all the sources are false. So it's a built-up conspiracy theory. So what Descartes says is, I believe in science, but I want to make sure that even the beginning of science is true. If not, it'll just be true ideas stacked on a weak false idea at the bottom, and it's all going to come tumbling down. So I'm going to ask you a discussion question here. As always, I need you to pause when I ask you the discussion question and think about it. If you don't have anything to say, that's fine. I ask multiple discussion questions, just do a different one. But pause it and give yourself some time to think and see what you have to say. So here is my discussion question for you for this recording. question is this. Why do you believe that 2 plus 3 equals 5? Why is that? I'm not saying, do you believe it? I'm not asking whether it's true. I bet you do believe it, and I also believe it's true. What I'm saying is, what are your grounds for believing that it's true? Not if it's true or not, but when I say, how do you know it's true? We all believe it. Why should we believe it? Why is it true? What can you point to? Okay, so pause the recording now and try to answer this. I know it's difficult. Why do you believe that 2 and 3 equals 5? How can you prove that 2 and 3 equals 5? How did you learn to have faith in this idea that 2 and 3 is 5? So please pause the recording now and think about that. Okay. This to some people is going to be a mind-blowing idea. A mind-blowing question. To other people, it will be the most eye-rolling and teeth-gritting question. But I want to point out that it's not something we should roll our eyes at necessarily, but it's a real question. Think about if you were reading a book but the letters were corrupted. Somehow the letters were not what the author wrote down. Now, the letters might still add up to words and a story, but if they're not what the author wrote down, then they could be corrupted and give you a totally false story that would be coherent and seem to make sense. So how do we make sure that our letters are correct? The analogy goes right over to numbers. Almost every science uses number as the core of expressing its true understanding. But numbers seem to be the most abstract, unreal thing imaginable. So put it this way, where in the world did you learn numbers from? And I mean literally where? You don't go and find 3 and 2 out there in the world and then, like put them together and they have a baby named 5. No, you've never seen 2 and 3 come together and equal 5. Now you might say, yes, I have. I've got 2 apples and 3 apples, and then I count them up and it's 5. Well, first of all, that's, how do I put it? That's not how you learned this. It might be a true example from it, but it's not how you learned it. And also if I say, what's 1,000 times 5? You certainly never learned that it's 5,000 by getting, 2,000 apples and 3,000 apples or whatever, and then putting them together and then counting them. No. Also, I'm asking, how do you know it's reliable? I know that if 2 and 3 equal 5, then 2 and 3,000 equals 5,000. What I'm asking is, why do we believe that 2 and 3 equals 5 in the first place? Because we've built all this other stuff. 2 and 3,000 equals 5,000. On 2 and 3 equals 5. But those numbers could somehow be corrupt or misleading in the same way that letters in a book could be corrupted or misleading. Now maybe you say, well, old Mrs. Franks, she was my math teacher. She taught me 2 and 3 is 5. I believe her. But you see, that's not necessarily a great reason for believing something. What if she also taught you about, say, the Easter Bunny? Well, she's, not every authority figure knows about everything. Or maybe she was your math teacher, but if you asked her what Shakespeare said, she wouldn't give you a very good answer. It's not her expertise. Okay, so I'm interested in seeing what you say in the discussion for this. And I know some people will be sort of frustrated or think the answer is obvious. Some will love the question and love how difficult it is to answer. But we'll leave it aside for now. I just want to point you now to the synopsis. Okay, this is pages 9 to 11 from that file by Descartes. It's actually the Meditations by Descartes I'm talking about now, and it's those first pages 9 through 11. What Descartes has nicely done for you is he says, we are going to go through my book, The Meditations, step by step. I'm going to summarize for you the main meditations, they're called, but the main chapters. And I want you to see that I move step by step, and I start from the very beginning. Why does 2 and 3 equal 5? And then I slowly build that up into proving 2 and 3 equals 5. Then I can prove that 2,000 and 3,000 equal 5,000. Then I can take a further step and prove that if 2 and 3,000 equal 5,000, that then I can apply those to, say, the velocity of objects, etc. So I want you to read the synopsis there, and if you're not clear on what it was doing, it's a summary of the book, which is helpful to have before you read. And it's also him trying to show you, look, you couldn't put meditation 4 in front of meditation 2. It'd be the wrong order. We have to go slow and steady. Start from 0 and then move to 1. Move to 1 and then move to 2. 2 to 3. You have to go slowly and in order, because, broken record here, good ideas are always solidly connected to other good ideas. They have to go in a sensible order, and you have to be patient when you interrogate these ideas. Don't rush through them. Okay. So, it's really hard. I have so much respect for my students. I don't know that I could have gotten, if you're taking this as a freshman especially, I don't remember when I read the meditations, but it's commonly taught in philosophy, intro to philosophy, but it's also a pretty difficult reading. One reason it's difficult is that I'm asking you to keep your eye on how this relates to science, and therefore how philosophy is useful for all kinds of seeking truth. And I'm trying to ask you to keep your eye on very particular things, like I'll ask you to track very particular things Descartes says when we get to the heart of the reading later. So I'm going to try to give you an example that will help you see maybe why you need philosophy to know other things in your life, and to show you how doing philosophy can help you cut out false ideas from your life, and it can help you build on or combine on true ideas in your life. Okay, so think of it this way. If you want to do science, you often use science experiments, right? Okay, here's what philosophy will say. If you want to do a science experiment properly, then you must know what the experimenter is. If you want to be a human being doing an experiment, you have to know what it means to be a human being. So for example, philosophy for a long time talks about how humans perceive. We look through our eyeballs and we see certain things. However, there are many things that our eyeballs cannot perceive, like X-rays, right? Okay. So, if you want to do an experiment, a science experiment, you have to know what the experimenter is, the human being at the heart driving the experiment. You're going to want to ask questions like, how do human eyeballs perceive? You're going to want to ask very philosophical questions like, maybe there are things I cannot see with my eyeballs. How would I have access to things that I can't see, smell, feel, etc.? It was exactly those kind of philosophical questions that helped scientists realize there might be something very real that they still couldn't see, smell, touch, etc. And it's philosophers who ask these sort of backwards, indirect questions where they say things like, well, if I can't see it, is there any workaround for me to still experience this thing outside of my senses? How can I indirectly track X-rays? How can I make the invisible X-ray visible to the human eye? Okay? And it's not only science that answers these questions about what the human eye can see. Philosophy has been asking for 2,000 years, giving very good answers. asking questions like, is the mind physical like the eyeball is physical or not? Does the mind literally see in the way the eyeball literally sees physically? And if not, can the mind see in a metaphorical sense, so a non-physical, non-eyeball sense? Can the mind perhaps experience more than the eyeball? Does it in fact experience less than the physical eyeball? Or does it experience things just differently? Not really more things or fewer things, but just different things. Those sort of questions. Is the mind the same thing as the physical? If not, is it smaller than, bigger than, different than the physical? These are exactly philosophy questions. They are hard for scientists to answer, but they are the bread and butter of philosophers. These are those big metaphysical questions that you've heard me talk about before. And it can be a back and forth. Philosophy is good at asking metaphysical questions like, is your mind anything different than your body? If so, is it better, worse, or just different? Philosophy is great at asking that kind of metaphysical question. That then leads science to develop new techniques and inventions. Wait a second, maybe there's something out there that's real that my eyeball can't see, but that the human mind might be able to know more than the physical eye can see. Maybe the mind can know invisible things while the eye can only know visible things. And then science discovers the X-rays. It's a back and forth. Science is very good at running experiments. Philosophy is very good about asking, well, what does it mean to experiment? Or what does it mean to be an experimenter, a human being? And the two go back and forth and mutually support each other. So this is what the synopsis says next. This is pages 9 to 11, the other reading, the one that's actually by Descartes. A summary I'll give you is this is where the book we're about to read heads. Descartes says, I personally am not sure that I have the perfect truth on every idea. In fact, I personally know that I've been mistaken or deceived before, and I don't like it. But I don't know where to start with my ideas. How can I tell my fake ideas from my real ideas? They all seem true to me. And he says, okay, what I'm going to do in the first meditation is I'm going to say, what if I just set aside every idea? I stop believing in every idea because I'm tired of believing in some fake ideas, some false ideas. And he says, okay, in the second meditation, I'll say, what if it's not even that I've got some fake ideas, but all my ideas are false or fake? What if life is a hallucination? What if there is some magic demon constantly fooling me about everything? This is basically the Matrix. It relates to movies like Inception as well. Then he says, okay, what I can still figure out is that even if I am insane and I'm having insane false ideas, there's one idea which can't be insane or false. It's that I'm the one having these ideas, so I must be real. If I think that I'm a human, maybe I'm insane and I'm actually an elephant or dragon, but I'd still be something, elephant, dragon, or human, insane or sane, but I'd still be something thinking these thoughts. So now we've got a first certain idea. And then in the third meditation, he discovers, well, wait, if I'm for sure a thinking thing, then I have a mind. From there, he moves on in the third meditation to say, how did my mind be the way it is? Maybe God made my mind the way it is. And in the fourth meditation, he pushes that even further, the fourth and the fifth, and discovers more new, true ideas. It's just like science. He breaks down everything he doesn't know into its smallest part. He finds one thing he can be certain about through a sort of experiment, a philosophical experiment. Then he slowly, patiently builds up those few small things that he knows for certain into a general, overall, unified theory of what he can know and what he can still be unsure or not know about. That's the synopsis. It all goes step by step. It moves from doubt to a method to resolve doubt, to a few certain ideas that he cannot doubt because they're true, to a whole bunch of true ideas at the end. That's where we're headed. Okay. So I hope you like this mix of summary of Descartes and sort of context. It should make this difficult reading you're about to do of the meditations a little bit easier and have more, it'll be a richer sense for you with this background. Please, as always, if you have any questions, you're curious about any of this, just shoot me an email and we can talk as much or as little as you want about it, okay? Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.